I'm genuinely excited to dive into the world of marketing and business development with you, especially through the lens of PropTech and innovation in real estate. For those of you who may not be familiar with Brad, he is the founder and editor of Thesis Driven, a go-to resource for built world innovation. Before Thesis Driven, he founded Common, a multifamily operator pioneering co-living and micro apartments, and he co-founded General Assembly, a global tech trade school. Brad has grown a loyal following and community through a paid newsletter with over 12,000 subscribers, a strong LinkedIn presence with over 20,000 followers, and the Thesis Driven Leaders Series podcast, which has surpassed 100,000 listeners, just kicked off season 2 with a sponsor on board. So today I'd love to tap into your insights on the marketing strategies that have worked best for you, lessons you've learned along the way, and what actually has driven growth and the advice you wish you knew earlier. So let's kick this off with what is a typical day in the life? What does it look like for you as you build the engine behind Thesis Driven?
So, well, first, Dana, thank you so much for the kind words and for having me on today. Really excited to join.
My pleasure.
I think that one of the challenges with the day in life is no 2 days look alike. I've got three kids at home, including a 9-month-old. So the beginning is usually involves getting them ready and getting the older ones to school. Uh, After that, try to touch base with the folks that are working on Thesis Driven with me. We have a content team working on our database product in the Philippines. We have our education team running our training programs here in New York. So just take a moment, touch base with the folks who are helping me out here, and then I try to get as many kind of interesting conversations through the day as possible. So I am still writing the thesis driven newsletter. We publish twice a week, so that often gets me on the phone with people building interesting, whether it's technology concepts, whether it's folks looking at the macro picture, whether it's developers doing innovative concepts as well. So I'm trying to look across the board and get a handle on what's going on, who are doing interesting things, what's worth kind of paying attention, and what might be compelling for our readership to dig into and to spend more time on.
Well, I know you have a lot on your plate, so I was curious what a day in the life looked like.
The challenge is to just balance learning and balance like the things that don't have an immediate actionable value with the long term, like, hey, this is, I have to stay with it. I have to stay fluent and stay fresh. That's the challenge.
Absolutely. And keeping a balance between all the content creation, the research, the networking, and scaling your business. I mean, that's just a huge weight on your shoulders, I'm sure. So let's rewind back a bit, back to October of 2022 when you launched Thesis Driven. If you remember, what was your first intentional marketing move that you made when you launched, and why did you start where you did?
So I had just left Common, the company the residential operating platform I co-founded in 2015. We brought on a CEO. I was thrilled at that transition, and we ended up we were in the process of selling the business. So we sold it shortly thereafter in early 2023. And I saw all these interesting things that were happening out there in the real estate world, innovative operators, people building new concepts, using technology in new ways. And I said, there's kind of nothing that is more actionable on the ground insights that aren't just, hey, this person bought this building from this other person and here's how much they paid and here's who the broker was. I mean, that's a lot of real estate trade press and it serves a role, but we wanted to think about what are the stories that are going to inform real estate investors, what is out on the horizon and what should they be paying attention to today that might influence their jobs in 12, 18, 24 months. And so that's why we started Thesis Driven. And we started it not totally from scratch, but I had assembled a list of about 700, 800 people, mostly real estate investors, mostly more on the institutional side than the retail side, that had followed me through Common, and maybe they had invested in some of our assets, maybe they were just friendly, and I knew they were interested in things that were going on in the real estate world. So I said, "Hey, would love for y'all to join this list," and put them all on the Thesis Driven list, and told them what I'd be doing. And that formed the base. And a lot of them saw our initial newsletters and said, "Wow, this is really unique insights." I mean, at the time, we only published once every 2 weeks. So when we published, it was, a 3,000 word deep dive into something very specific. It was into office to residential conversions, the role of data in real estate. We did one, or in real estate development, we did another one on ADUs, accessory dwelling units. So each one was pretty deep, and they got shared around a lot. And that formed the basis of our, not just, our growth, but, what would become our, our membership, and the seeds of the thesis driven business that we're running today.
So now fast forward 2.5 years later, looking at what marketing channels have delivered the best for you, what do you think, or how do you measure your ROI from, where you are now?
So we track absolutely, what is coming from where, and tracking is as much art as science, because everything is multi-touch at this point. So someone who is attributed to come through Google search, that doesn't necessarily mean they searched some topic, and because of our SEO strategy they found us. We get some of that, but a lot of it is they heard about us at a conference, they read a post I wrote on LinkedIn, and that drove them to Thesis Driven and one of our products. And so at this point, you obviously try to attribute as best as you can, but some of it does just come down to like, wow, I do a LinkedIn post that does really well, and I know that is, I see the pop across all channels, and it brings everything up. And so the channels that have worked really well for us, I would say first and foremost, LinkedIn has been an incredible marketing channel for us. I mean, starting when I started Thesis Driven, I spent almost no time on LinkedIn. I mean, I was on Twitter, what was at the time Twitter, and I enjoyed that much more as a platform. That, Instagram, but LinkedIn was where, I mean, the numbers don't lie. LinkedIn was where the leads were coming from, and that's where people were converting to paid. And, we've gone viral on Reddit a few times. We've gone viral on Hacker News a few times, on Twitter a bunch, and they don't convert. Like, nobody pays. They don't convert to the newsletter. They don't convert to, by and large, to our courses. They don't convert to our data subscription. LinkedIn, they convert, they pay. And so even if the traffic numbers are lower, I mean, you look at the single biggest days of traffic we've had to Thesis Driven, it's Hacker News and it's Reddit, but zero conversions, or minimal conversions, under 10 from each
Do
one
you,
of those
do you
spikes.
remember your top LinkedIn post of all time? Or what was one of your best,
So,
biggest?
so my top LinkedIn post of all time, in terms of engagements, was actually a post I did like 4 years ago, when they completed this rail link, very wonky, from China to Laos. I posted about a hypothetical train trip you could now do from southern Portugal to Singapore. And I don't know why, but many tens of thousands of likes and comments off of it. Part of me, like in hindsight, believes it was like, it got sucked up into some CCP propaganda engine promotion of like, here's an American businessman talking about the Belt and Road Initiative, which I totally did not intend to do, but I think that's probably like what it was, because I've never replicated anything quite like that ever since. And it didn't do me any good from a business value standpoint, mostly because I didn't really like know how to use LinkedIn for business back then. I was just posting. In terms of actual business impact, we've really ramped that up over the past 6 months. There's been a few. I mean, I posted one about capital raising lessons in real estate just a couple of weeks ago, and it did quite well, and drove a few hundred leads into our courses pipeline. So I think we're getting a little more predictable about it, but still have never seen anything as successful as my you know Chinese railroad one.
Got it. All right, so let's switch gears for a second and talk a little bit about Common. And if you were relaunching Common today, which I know it's a different time, but what marketing strategies would you fast track or would you skip altogether?
Hmm. So Common had, it's kind of unique and challenging in that it had two separate marketing pipelines. It had a tenant pipeline and it had an owner pipeline. The tenant pipeline was never really the problem, and I don't want to say we like didn't pay that close of attention to it, but generally, as long as we had units that were well priced in good locations, we didn't have any problems filling the room. So it became much more about the owner side, the developer side, and you know, in many cases with Common, I think when we thought we had marketing problems, we in fact had product problems. And I would say that goes for the owner side as well, more so than the tenant side. And I think the biggest mistakes we made were not necessarily like ways we could have done the marketing better. I mean, there's certainly, I can talk about ways we could have done the marketing better, but I don't want to just approach it as like that was the problem. The problem was that it took us way too long to understand how the real estate industry really worked and what owners and developers really wanted to build. And I think we fought against that for way too long. Things like, pushing really extreme unit configurations of, 4 and 5 bedroom apartments or even more that, just were not financeable products. And, we got away from that pretty quickly. But like, I think it's important to understand what the real estate industry wants and market to that. And so I think a lot of it would have been around being more specific about addressing the objections we were getting further down in the funnel from owners and developers in our marketing itself, and being a little more systematic about that. Uh, Particularly once co-living as a concept really started like taking off and like had the wind at its back. And so perhaps being a less opinionated on the end product, and more thoughtful around what our customer, the real estate developer, really wanted.
Got it. So now you're coaching owners and managers in the prop tech space around lead generation,
Hmm.
funnel thinking, audience
Yep.
building. So, what's a piece of advice that you could offer to real estate firms who are trying to level up their marketing and their business development strategy?
Yeah, totally. I mean, so there's a few frameworks I use to help guide vendors, prop tech companies in particular, about this. And one of the first things I focus on is start from the bottom of the funnel and work up. I think a lot of there's a big tendency to like, hey, let's do the big lead generation campaigns. Let's get out there, do a lot of outbound, and that's great. Like those conversations are really valuable from a sales perspective, from a product perspective. But I often see people starting at the top of the funnel and saying we're going to get a bunch of leads and we're going to do our best, as opposed to start with the bottom of the funnel, start with a few people at who are qualified. Really figure out that sales motion. What are the combination of steps you are going to use to get them to convert, get them being a paying customer, and then as you have confidence, work your way up the funnel. And then finally, when you start doing big paid campaigns, big content campaigns, there's you have confidence and you know what the intermediate value of your leads is worth. So when you generate a sales call, when you generate a lead, you know what dollar value that is worth. And that's really the magic to being able to triangulate campaigns and where you're spending your time and spending your money is if you can assign and attribute dollar values to steps further down the funnel.
That's great, a great piece of advice. I was hoping to unveil your secret sauce, and I think you gave everybody just a little bit. So I appreciate that. So when somebody signs up for Thesis Driven, they're prompted to check out your recommendations. So that's Notorious ROB to Maximum New York. So my question is, why do you recommend those specific voices? And how do you stay informed in this world with endless amounts of content and noise.
Yeah, totally. So that's part of the Substack co-registration flow that whenever someone joins a Substack, they walk you through. Which is a bit of a blessing and a curse. I mean, I always talk to people about like what email service provider do you want to choose, and like Substack is kind of it's interesting. It's very different than a lot of other email service providers, namely that they will do things like that. So I recommend probably about 40 different Substacks out there, things that I read. And you named two, Notorious ROB and Maximum New York, which could not be more different. But I read both of them for very specific purposes. So Notorious ROB is probably the best voice on the single family brokerage world out there. So if you really want to know what's going on in the world of like, anywhere brands and the realtors and all that, great resource. And that's not a world I know a lot about, but it's one that I want to keep tabs on. And then Maximum New York is a really thoughtful Substack that is very wonky and very niche, but it is about the inner workings of New York City government and how to make New York City. I'm a New York resident. How to make New York better. So that's just a personal enjoyment of mine and it's painful because there are a lot of problems, but it's a fun one to read.
Thank you. So reflecting back now on everything you've built from General Assembly, Common, and now Thesis Driven, what's a lesson about growth or brand building that only became clear after experience success firsthand?
Get the product right. I feel like when I was 15 years ago when I was starting to do this, I was always looking for like a marketing hack. Like, oh, this is like the user flow. This is the channel that like, I put $1 in, I get a buck 50 out the other end. And you can totally do that. And some very smart people I know are, running those kind of lead generation campaigns and monetizing in that way. But I guess as I've gotten older, I've just cared a lot more about building a great product and than like fully min-maxing on every dollar of marketing spend and relying on those word of mouth channels, those referral channels. Like I don't want to build leaky buckets here, and so a lot of what I've really embraced, I think getting more mature into this world is just the value of having a really good product and using your marketing, not just to drive leads, but to learn things about the product and what your customer wants at the end of the day. And like if you can get that feedback loop working where like your marketing is generating conversations on the sales side and you're learning what people want and you're building on top of that, I think that's where the magic is.
Well, that's a great answer because everybody wants to know what's the one thing that you would do if you knew now that you didn't know then. So that's very interesting. Okay, so this last one is a little bit personal, but I'm looking behind your shoulder at the books on your shelf, and I was wondering if there's anything that has impacted your thinking or that you want to mention, any of these specific books of. Maybe one's your
Oh,
favorite, one
I mean,
inspired you professionally.
which do I mean, how do you beat the joys of Yiddish? I mean, nothing like,
Amazing.
I would say actually, if I had to pick one, I will say this one, which was the inspiration for Common. It is not a very well-known book. It is very wonky. It's called Living Downtown by a guy named Paul Groth, and it's basically an academic book. But it goes into the history of residential hotels in the United States, which, if you go back prior to World War II, most people who lived in cities did not live in apartment buildings the way we think about them today. They would live in something that looked like a hotel. Now, they lived there long term, um, but the best kind of popular culture comparison would be the saloon. You're watching a Western and like the cowboy rides into town and, he goes into the saloon and he rents a room at the saloon. So the saloon is like kind of a hotel, but he also kind of lives at the saloon. And he eats downstairs. Doesn't have a kitchen upstairs. He eats downstairs. That's a residential hotel. And that's how a lot of people in America lived prior to World War II. And they were destroyed over most of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s through regulation. Some of it very well-meaning, and some of it very, there are some bad residential hotels out there. But we also lost a really important source of affordable housing and, frankly, community in America's cities. So definitely a book, Living Downtown by Paul Groth. Uh, Very old and very academic book. It's very wonky. I mean, you see it's thick. Um, but definitely one that was very influential. But I could tell a story about a lot of those up there.
All right, give us one more.
I mean, do you want the joys of Yiddish?
No, no, no,
No. It's a wine Bible too. Talk about the wine.
no. All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a valuable conversation. I thank you for sharing your insights and experiences. And at RIZZ, I'm all about helping commercial real estate professionals level up their marketing and business development. And I know in today's conversation, this will spark some new ideas for our audience. So, Brad, I have to say, you definitely have RIZZ. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dana.